So I wanted to ask how we talk about Spike started us off with these buzzwords that we all know now we're not allowed to use anymore, and I'm getting grief. And so how do we effectively, as chefs, how do you guys effectively tell this story of what you are doing, or and Julie, I know you work with passing this on to consumers and how you can do that. How can they not only make the extra effort to thoughtfully source and use these items, but how do you express that to someone without beating them over the head or preaching at them?
I mean, I think the message has to be in the whole menu, in the philosophy of the restaurant. And when you look at a chef or a restaurant that says that, this is all, I'm all in sustainability and farm to table and that, and then you go in the restaurant in the middle of winter and you see food that has to be coming from, California or halfway around the world, or Chile, or, you see a seasonal menu but then desserts with, mangoes or something that aren't coming. But it's hard to buy into it. So I think one is being really authentic and real about what you're doing and embracing it fully. And I really think, it comes through in the food, and I think that servers and people who are actually standing there at the table are really key, and, knowledgeable, informed servers who can talk to you about what's on the plate and where it comes from is key. It's a tough balancing act, because you don't want to be preachy and holier than thou, and people go out to eat to enjoy themselves and eat good food, and don't necessarily want a lesson in environmental responsibility every time they go somewhere. But I think getting as much information out there, either on the physically written on the menu, or just in the minds and the spirit of the people who are there talking to each and every guest is important. And I think authenticity on the menu, be it serving less meat, serving smaller portions of meat, making sure letting the vegetables really shine, and really fully embracing seasonality, I guess.
Good. Anyone else? We go to the line. That's fine.
I'm happy. You want a response from each of us, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I'll be brief because I know you guys have questions and you don't want to monopolize. But for Meatless Monday, I've worked with a number of chefs, both at restaurants and for school districts, who always tell me that it's about making it fun. It's like Julia said, you can't be trying to guilt people into doing the right thing. It's got to be fun. They'll do things like put up posters, march to a different drumstick, try Meatless Monday, or anything that's kind of cute. One chef put on the menu, put a picture of Popeye flexing, eating their spinach salad that I was eating. Those are the type of fun things that I think can help entice people to do things like eat less meat.
I guess no one wants to read about the commodity titles when they go out to eat in a restaurant.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, the nerd in me says just have the literature there, because it's such a great story, the history of agriculture and its changes in the policy. And then if people are interested, the stories are there, the stories of the growers, people who survived these farm crises and kept the family farm going, which is an enormous accomplishment. These are inspiring stories. And the diversity of people who are involved in the food industry and system that we have, those are interesting stories. And I think encouraging people to realize that the act of eating is an act of pleasure, but it also can be a big part of the solution. There's an empowering aspect of that.
Right. A thought that's in my head right now is when restaurants don't take advantage, and I ate seafood somewhere, and I knew that rockfish had just come in season from Steve Vilnit's emails, and I knew that this chef worked with him, with the Maryland DNR. And everyone else at my table ordered something terrible and out of season, and I knew to get the rockfish. And if they had just put that on the menu, everyone could have made the best decision in my mind, right? Which is what I ordered. And it was really far better than the other fried fish, even in the same preparation. So telling them what you have, I guess. Forrest, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say the opportunities for connecting with your producer, they're unprecedented at this point. Short of getting in a time machine and going back 75 years, where pretty much all of everybody in the crowd would have either lived on a farm or been a farmer. We can now connect at farmers markets. We can subscribe to CSAs. We can go on farm tours. we can participate in just buying clubs and all sorts of ways to connect to our folks. And one thing I just want to emphasize so much is for the folks that are raising some of this food in some of these photographs we saw there, these aren't people that are espousing animal cruelty. They're not folks that are saying like, my goal as a kid was to grow up to be like this guy that sells raises cruel chickens. Okay, they want to grow up to be superheroes and world savers just like everybody in the room, hopefully that does or did. And what we can do is recognize that farmers are business people just like anybody else. If you give them a compelling reason to raise food differently, they're going to do it. We just need to capitalize it with our goodwill. So it'll be positive peer pressure is very contagious.
Great. And questions from the audience, go ahead and raise your hand, and you can steal one of these microphones, or two of them. And there's one in the middle, in the green. And we can take whoever's on deck over here. Go ahead.
Oh, I have a question for Paul, which is about the use of antibiotics in animals. And I wonder, what would it look like? What would the lives be like for animals if we were able to ban the use of antibiotics for healthy animals?
Great question. So it's estimated that about 70% of the antibiotics in the country are produced not for us when we get sick, but for farm animals. And it's not that farm animals are sick, except they're living in pretty horrible conditions, and that antibiotics help them to grow faster. They help them survive these stressful, inhumane, and unhygienic circumstances that we have them living in. There's been an effort by many, including the American Medical Association, to get rid of the misuse of antibiotics that are useful for humans in livestock, and it's really gone nowhere, primarily because the pharmaceutical and meat industries are extremely influential. And so, you have, I was reading a story in the news the other day about a 5th grader who did tests on the supermarket meat that he got as his science project and found antibiotic residues on the meat that he got at his local supermarket. And really incredible. And so the question is, what would it look like if we weren't doing this? And we have some data on that because in Denmark they have gone down that road. And conditions for farm animals are surprisingly not that different. They are different, they're a little bit more hygienic, the animals might have a little bit more space, but it's not that they aren't factory farming still. They are still factory farming, they still have animals who largely don't go outdoors, who are on cement and concrete for their entire lives. So it would be an improvement, and it would also probably mean that animals would grow a bit slower, which would be good. Most farm animals have been bred to either grow extremely fast, which is detrimental to their health and welfare, or to produce vast quantities of eggs and milk, again, detrimental to welfare. So it would have some modest animal welfare benefits, but I think the primary benefits would be in public health for humans, not necessarily for animal welfare. So it would be a win-win, but I think the win would be more for us than for them, which is, of course, still, we're interested in humans as well.
Great, and I want to ask, if there's any chefs that have questions, you get first dibs. So, and if not, we'll go to another question. Blue shirt. And you can share your name with us if you want, unless you're under
Sure. Jeremy Anderson, I'm the chef at the Early Center in Warrenton, Virginia. We pride ourselves in purchasing our meat and produce locally. I'm seeing the pie chart with the 5% of purchasing locally versus sustainable. Are there enough farmers and is there enough farmland out there to supply our country with sustainable food? Purchasing locally, that's for any of the families out there.
I'll tell you, my response is that we need more farmers.
I can follow up on that. I agree. Yeah, absolutely. We're cranking out farmers as fast as we can with our and it's a slow food requires a comprehensive education about that because we can't shortcut it with chemical solutions. Every farm's going to be unique, and we got to have mechanisms to understand that. one thing people ask me all the time, say, if everybody went organic, the whole world would starve to death. Okay, well that's, fear is a very powerful mechanism. Just ask Fox News, right? And then I think fear appeals to a lot of people. It's a kind of a twisted comfort mechanism. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling thing. Well, if we did that, then everybody starved to death, so let's just keep doing what we're doing, kind of thing. But one thing, for example, that is statistically relevant is there's roughly 100 million acres of corn got planted this year. Corn's at an all-time price high, at least it was when the seed went in the ground this year. It's gone back a little bit. So roughly, for the sake of argument, 100 million acres of corn, over 90% of that is going to go into animal feed and ethanol. Okay? Of the remaining 10%, a huge amount of that is going to be exported as food aid and go into high fructose corn syrup. Okay, so very little is going into Tostitos and human food. Conversely, there's 600 million acres of underutilized pasture in the United States. Grasslands, meadows. This isn't pasture that's already in production, producing this food. This is underutilized or non-utilized pasture. And if we can extrapolate on an average grass farm, it takes 2 acres to grow a 1 grass-finished beef over the course of the season. Then we can already grow more grass-fed beef than we're currently growing by using this corn in confinement feedlot operations. That math is pretty straightforward. So then it just gets back to having qualified producers.
I'll just go in. So this is an excellent question. There's a crisis right now in the U.S. because the average age of the farmer is in the 60s, and the stat is like 1 to 2% of the U.S. is growing. There's a infamous stat that there's more people in prison in the U.S. incarcerated than people who are actually farming. That's changing a little bit, but the general premise is there. But I would say if there's a healthy demand, then the supply will try to match that demand. I mean, that's the market logic. And then the policy end, there is some great legislation going into the Farm Bill drafts for beginner farmer rancher programs to try to help young people or middle-aged people who are trying to get into farming access credit, access land, get some ag extension help, get some good training, go through training programs. So policy, on some level, those programs are a little bit in limbo right now. But there's the beginnings of policy to help the transition to having a new generation of growers help meet the growing demand.
Sure.
I'm Ann Yonkers from Fresh Farm Markets. We have 11 farmers markets. Combination in Virginia and Maryland and DC. We started out with 15 farmers and now have 150 farmers and producers. But what we've seen in the last 5 years is the average age of farmers in direct marketing situations like farmers markets start going down. We're attracting young farmers through apprentice programs, but just because what you're seeing at American University is exactly what's driving young people into farming. I have a nephew who graduated from the University of Michigan, and he just bought a 40-acre farm, and he's going to make cheese in Kansas, goat cheese in Kansas. So there's something really happening, and I think as long as young people believe they can farm, get a fair price, and that they can raise animals humanely and have connections with their community, I think that you have a position, you have a possibility of really changing the face of American agriculture.
And it helps that it's sort of cool to be a farmer these days, right, Forrest?
Well, the thing is, when you're in a place like Washington, D.C. or suburban Maryland or Northern Virginia, we all get it.
Right.
We're well-read, we're educated, and we just say, why doesn't the rest of the world, why can't we just speed up the patience process? Why can't we make this slow food faster?
Well, as someone who's from Kansas, it just takes a little while. Any more questions we've got? I think this is our Farm Bill expert.
Hi, I'm Kathy Ozer, and I work with the National Family Farm Coalition here in D.C. and really appreciate the panel and the really recognition of how important it is for there to be farmers on their farms getting paid a fair price. And I think this last comment about access to credit and access to land is really key, because what we're seeing right now across the country, and not necessarily right in this area, but in other parts of the country, is land is being bought up at record levels, fueled by investors and investment who, for a variety of reasons, which we can imagine, are seeing this as something to buy relatively undervalued and hold on to. And one of the situations that we're seeing just in the last 6 months is an increasing number of farmers who have held on for the last 20 years, particularly dairy farmers, some of them organic, some in Wisconsin, being forced to sell out. And they're being forced to sell out even though they're doing everything that we would assume to be the right thing, finding good markets, being BGH-free, some of them being organic, all of these different factors, but unfortunately, they are not able to cover their production costs. And they also have creditors and bankers who are no longer being patient, and they're seeing that land being bought up for other uses, whether it's investment, whether it's in Wisconsin, it's sand for fracking. There's a whole sort of interconnection of what's happening around the country. And so I just really appreciate hearing the stories and the conversation here, but also to know that in the next couple weeks, the future of a lot of programs is at stake in this Farm Bill, and many of us are very concerned that there's lots of issues not being addressed in the Farm Bill, but there are many of us fighting to hold on to some of the best programs that have been created in the last 25 years, that in the midst of budget shutdowns and shortfalls are unfortunately the first to get cut. So really appreciate people being together and thinking about some of these issues.
Right.
So it's sort of not really a question, more a comment, but really think these are the issues we should be discussing. Thank
right.
you.
And you're talking about the intersection of both, a lot of farmland preservation groups have realized, oh, gee, we have to make sure there's farmers as well. And both of those worlds are really beginning to speak to each other. I don't know if any of you have anything to add to that, or what are some encouraging things that you see going on in this space? Yeah, go ahead.
First, I just want to thank Kathy for her comment. She knows I'm a fan of her organization, and I think it's a very important comment. Second, one of the things that I think, and I didn't get into this in my talk, but one of the things that I think is very, very promising is that if you look at meat consumption in the United States from, let's say, World War II to the present, it basically looks like this. And at the same time, you saw the number of farmers going down like this. It wasn't just that we are raising more and more animals for food. Certainly that was true. But it's more that on a per capita basis, we're eating more and more meat, to the point where now most Americans are eating meat every day of their lives, sometimes even every meal of their lives. I've talked to some people who say they literally would not go for one day as a vegetarian, even if they were paid to do it. That's how addicted our country has become. And we eat more meat per capita than nearly any other nation on the face of the planet. But when you see that trend, starting about 5 to 6 years ago, it actually started decreasing. And in fact, we've seen meat consumption on a per capita basis in the United States decline by over 10%. So as fruit and vegetable consumption is now increasing, the number of farmers is increasing, and the amount of meat being consumed is decreasing. This is one of the great success stories that we're seeing in the food and sustainability and public health sector, is that people actually are eating more fruits and vegetables. We are eating less meat. We have a long way to go, but the trends are now going in the right direction. And I tell you, it's one of the most promising things that I can think of. In around World War II, we raised 100 million animals for food in our country. 100 million animals. And there was very little factory farming. In 2007, we raised 9.5 billion animals for food. Virtually all of whom were factory farmed. Yet in 2012, that number, despite increasing human population in our country, that number declined to 9.0 billion. Down by half a billion fewer animals subjected to factory farming, meaning certainly an improvement in animal welfare, but also in public health and in the environment too. So that, I think, is a real success story. A lot longer to go, but positive trends happening.
There's a question in that corner. Any more chefs as well?
Thank you all. This is wonderful. My name is Riss. I'm a chef in town. I just want to know, how do you celebrate the people who are doing the right thing? The big companies that help. I would like 150 pounds of happy beef tenderloin. I don't have a Gucci restaurant that I would. You know, I don't have that restaurant where I could, whole animal is a really, really wonderful thing. But, you know, how we're supplying to our customers, and so, okay, serve less meat. I appreciate, and totally understand all that you've said. But how do we celebrate the bigger companies then who have the big money, who can help create better care for the animals and who can create sustainability in practice and can do all of that? And how do we celebrate, you know, the list of names that you had on the board that said, okay, these people are doing better things. It's small steps. And how do you celebrate them? How do we celebrate them? How do we, the consumer, know who has good practices? That's one of my big questions. Who is sustainable in practice? And to get everybody in this room and everybody in America who has to eat on less money, less dollars, but who can eat just that little bit better and can help support our cause.
I'm happy to answer that, but I want. Sure.
So, and we'll be writing down if there's all these certifications if you're going to throw this out.
I couldn't agree with you more. Look, I want more forests in the world, and the reality is, though, as was indicated earlier, 25% of the groceries sold in the country come from Walmart. The problem, just like it was said earlier, that humans are both the problem and the solution, that's the same as the case for the McDonald's and the Walmarts of the world. I would love it if everybody would go to farmers markets, but 1 out of 10 people in the country probably isn't getting a sizable portion of their food from farmers markets. So it's imperative to work with the biggest companies as well. They're not going to be going anywhere near to the level that a forest is going to, but they can do better. And many of them are. As I indicated in my talk, many of these big brands like McDonald's and others are doing better. In fact, Unilever, this is really interesting. Hellmann's mayonnaise. Anybody know what percentage of all mayonnaise sold in the country is Hellmann's? 42%. Of every bottle of mayonnaise in the country is Hellmann's, all right? This is a company that has 2 million chickens laying eggs just for one brand of mayonnaise. 2 million. And guess what? The company is moving to 100% cage-free eggs. Now, that is an amazing thing for a company of their size to be doing. Everyone in this room may think, well, cage-free, it's not idyllic, it's not Old McDonald's farm, but it's a whole lot better than what they were doing before. And so they deserve the applause, and they've received numerous awards from animal welfare groups for making this progress. It's important not to humane wash. It's important not to say, oh, look, these eggs are now going to be coming from forest-type conditions, but it is real progress that Unilever is making with Hellmann's and all their other egg-using brands. And so those type of companies, I think, deserve those progress awards. I wouldn't call them, I wouldn't say that they're now sustainable or whatever, but I would say that they're doing a whole lot better. They're making real progress, and we regularly celebrate those companies. I do think, further to the point, it was really fascinating to me. I was talking with Forrest before you all arrived, and I was thinking about this whole concept of eating less meat and making sure that the meat that people do eat comes from pasture-based systems. And here's a guy who is doing such a high level of animal welfare. His entire life comes from raising animals for food. And what percentage of your diet would you say is vegetarian?
Well, I'm on the road. When I'm outside my farm, it's 100%.
100% when you're outside the farm. I mean, this is like, you look at, and I talked to so many folks who are involved in the livestock business. I was just on a pasture-based pig farm in Missouri earlier this week, and they told me the same thing. They say that this guy told me that 70% of his diet is vegetarian. 70%, and the guy's a pig farmer. Like, we're seeing so much progress now that many of these sustainable high animal welfare farmers themselves are refusing to buy the CAFA meat, hopefully, and that means buying less meat, dramatically less meat oftentimes. And hopefully we'll start seeing more and more urban dwellers who are not themselves farmers, but also making the same type of conscientious decisions that these folks are making with their consumer dollars.
And just to tack on, if there's, it's hard to aggregate all of the labels and everything that's out there and navigate that world. I don't know if there's good kind of gathering places that each of you would kind of, these websites or something, like I know that there are dozens maybe that you go to check on, but
You need only one.
Oh, what is that?
HumaneSociety.org/labels.
/labels, there you go.
HumaneSociety.org/labels will tell you what all the need.
Julia, do you have one?
I was going to say CSPI or
CSPI, yeah.
Center for Local Future does some amazing work, and just to be an educated consumer takes so much work
Work.
right now. There's so many labels, and it really is asking a lot of consumers. And but I think the way we celebrate people who are attempting to do the right thing is with our dollars, and like eating, not eating meat when you're not on your farm. That sends a message, and if we all can try and do that more, and even in the context of the restaurant, the purveyors that you choose to work with, even if you're not buying the whole animal, there are ways to send a message with your purchasing power.
And I'll just throw in there really quick. Also, the Coalition of Monopoly Workers, which is kind of picking up where the UFW and Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta left off in the 60s and the 70s with boycotts and trying to bring farm labor equity issues to the forefront. They're doing really good work at targeting companies and getting them to sign into this code of conduct to protect whistleblowers, to stop sexual harassment in the fields, to increase some degree of livable wages for the workers, and to decrease disproportionate pesticide exposure. And so, little by little, Trader Joe's, after much fight, finally signed on. Whole Foods signed on. Taco Bell was the first up of that boycott 2005. So I think just at least giving a nod to the companies that are also thinking about farm worker labor, in addition to animal rights and environmental issue, would also help
That's a
corporate
place for the world to know who are these companies. You know, that's that we can use our money
Yeah.
and our power of the dollar to support them to then grow what we want.
Yeah, there's no shortage of labeling companies stepping into that gap, certifications, and then it's kind of what we've asked for is who's doing it, and then now you have to kind of dig through. I know there's seafood companies there. I think Oceana is here today with something that chefs can sign on to. So there's all sorts of that, and we'll try to gather some of that with the video about this. I wanted to close with a question for you all, just to kind of wrap this together. When we talk about diversity, was I think maybe a key word, maybe that can replace sustainability, who knows. So when we look at what's good for a farm and what's good for our environment, what would a plate, kind of an ideal plate, look like, or a week of plates like Forrest laid out at a restaurant that's trying to model their plate after what's good for the environment around us? Maybe Forrest, you could start and we'll go this direction.
Well, I mean, one disclaimer. I was at Airlie just like 2 weeks ago.
Oh yeah, Airlie.
And there's a chef that said, "Look, we want to, support seasonal and local, but we get to the point where they say, hey, would you like some kale with your kale? Would you like some kale with that?" So all this stuff is it all goes with a grain of salt, pun intended. What a balanced plate, I think, would be very much heavy on vegetables. And don't get me wrong, grass-fed beef is eating your vegetables. Grass-fed meat is highly mineralized. Look, the cows can do what we can't. Nobody is interested in eating their lawn. That's why we have lawnmowers. Okay, but what we can do is we can use perennial grasslands on 50-day rotations to be sequestering carbon right out of the air for free, taking nitrogen out of the air for free, taking these animals and creating a slow food that's nutrient dense, that has actual flavor to it because it's packed with minerals that the grasses and clovers need to survive and be healthy, and then we can celebrate that sacrifice of that animal by celebrating the whole animal. So I would say a truly sustainable piece of a chuck roast or some kind of stew would be great, and the rest would be vegetables and sustainable grains, and let's have it like an apple for dessert.
Yeah. For seasonality.
That's my fantasy.
I'm not a chef, so this is really fun for me to think about. I usually don't think about this. But I would say, I don't have specifics, but I would say a celebration of creativity. I think we have a very narrow understanding of chicken breast is the only thing we eat of the chicken, and only this white potato is the only thing we eat of the tubers. So I think exploring neglected and underutilized species, which is a technical term for all of those cultivars that don't get mass produced. I mean anything from perennial grains. There's amazing work done in the Midwest trying to perennialize grain crops and trying to think through what would a perennial wheat or perennial corn taste like and how could that be cooked up. This is going to sound crazy. Insects. And on a global food security level, insects have been part of traditional cuisines. I've never eaten an insect, but I have to kind of open my mind. Maybe that could be part of what constitutes gourmet in the future. I don't know. It would save a lot of water. And I think just a celebration of diversity and flavor and traditional culinary cuisines, place-based. There's amazing cuisines in the U.S., Mexican, Native American cuisines, African American, Appalachian, and really drawing on that and regenerating that for 21st century American cuisine.
I have eaten a lot of insects, all of them prior to 10 years old though. But I didn't seem worse off for it. I think they probably were, but I never had any problems. I ate a lot of caterpillars as a kid. It was pretty bizarre. Yeah, I mean, look, I echo the sentiments. I think, heaping servings of vegetables are awesome. For my ideal plate, I would definitely make sure to have some quinoa on there. That's like my power grain. So, and my own little parochial interest, I say go quinoa.
I would say that I don't think of it in terms of what is the ideal plate or the best plate. I would look at the ideal menu and look at the menu as a whole, and I look for a balanced menu where I can look through all the dishes and see that what's really being highlighted is what's in season around wherever I am, and see, can I just find out where is this food actually coming from by just reading this menu? Do I see the same products being utilized in different ways throughout the menu so I can see that everything is really being used? I would like to see more vegetarian items on the menus, not just like the token dishes, and I think that we're already seeing this trend moving along. But I think, the ideal plate for the environment's health and for our health is the menu overall that really is vegetable heavy, seasonal. You can know where your food is coming from, and you see how it's being used in creative ways throughout the menu. That's what I really think.
Great. So chefs, there's your menu for the week. Insects and other things. So thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate all of you being here. And the panelists are available for you to come meet. Thank you, panelists. Thank you to TISM, Food Day, and foodpolicy.us.